Yes, so I'm Karen Schlatter. I work with Francisco and others at the Sonoran Institute. We're a conservation nonprofit that's based in Tucson, Arizona. But we have field offices across the West. I think some of you are familiar with some of our other work we do. We also have a field office in Mexicali, Mexico, which is where we do a lot of our work out of for our restoration efforts in the Colorado River Delta. So I'm going to talk with you today. I'm going to kind of build off of what Osvel's presentation laid out this morning about restoration efforts in the Delta. Hopefully all of you caught that. So there'll probably be a few tests afterwards. And then I'll talk about specifically some of the Minute 319 restoration projects that are ongoing, and then in addition, some of our vegetation monitoring that we're doing as part of Minute 319, and also active site monitoring in the Laguna Grande site. So we heard from Matt about these areas that were inundated and sort of the passive restoration areas in Laguna Grande. I'll talk more about our active restoration areas. There we go. I want to recognize first the Minute 319 science team. So the work that I'll be presenting about the monitoring efforts along the river are part of this larger collaboration of scientists. You can see there's a huge number of amazing people working on this effort. I particularly want to mention Pat Shafroth of the USGS and Ed Glenn of the University of Arizona, who are the leads of the vegetation monitoring team. So if you forgot, the Delta is still located at the base of the river down there in Mexico. The modern Delta today, as Osvel and others were talking about, there's a few remnant wetland areas, including La Ciénaga, El Doctor wetlands, and then the Riparian corridor. I'm mostly going to focus on the Riparian corridor since that's where the study area of Minute 319 is. I'm going to kind of run you through what the river looks like along starting at the top and going down to the estuary. So in Reach 1, this is the location of Morelos Dam way at the top there. And in Reach 1, because it receives some of those seepage flows from the dam, there's decent depth of groundwater, and there are some areas of remnant wetland habitat and riparian vegetation. In Reach 2, the groundwater starts to diminish, and we have a lot of the groundwater pumping that's going on. And so there is some native habitat up at the top, but as we get further down in the reach, it's primarily a dry channel, and we have a lot of tamarisk. In Reach 3, this is entirely a dry channel and a lot of tamarisk. And then Reach 4 is where we start to get some more groundwater seepage from agricultural return flows and native riparian habitat as well. So a lot of our restoration efforts that have been ongoing for the past few years, and also as part of Minute 319, are focused in Reach 4 and in this upper area in Reach 2, where there's pretty favorable depth of groundwater. So this is a few images of kind of the diversity of what things are looking like on the river in the Delta. So Morelos Dam, we can see that the river basically all flows into a canal at that point, and there's not much going into the Mexican side of the river. Dry channel in Reach 3. Reach 4, we've got a little bit of water in the channel and some tamarisk, some native habitat here and there. And then this is the estuary, which is a lot of dry mud flats at this point. I have some nice aerial images, which unfortunately the color of this is a little off, but Reach 1, again, just showing the extent of the floodplain and some of the tamarisk, and then cottonwoods dispersed here and there, Baccharis species, willow as well. Reach 2, this is lower down in Reach 2, where it's dry. So again, not much happening. I didn't have an aerial of Reach 2, so that's a lot of tamarisk there for you. Reach 3, this is the southern international boundary, and you can see also a very dry, sandy channel. So important to note this, when we think about the pulse flow, trying to move down the river channel and get down to Reach 4, where there is water in the channel and favorable depth to groundwater for native riparian species. So this is actually one of the areas targeted for restoration under Minute 319. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but El Chauce, you can see there's kind of this historic river meander here and a lot of cottonwood and willow habitat that follow that meander. And as Matt talked about earlier, the Laguna Grande complex is this set of historic river meanders as well along the river channel. So here's some outline meanders here. And this is actually where we've done some of our active restoration in Laguna Grande so far. This is just another set of meanders in the Laguna Grande complex. So here's some of those wildfires you can see went through the site and actually burned a lot of willow this past year, but they've made a strong comeback. So one thing I want to point out is that while we do have some significant patches of riparian habitat in the Delta, especially compared to the rest of the lower Colorado River, which is not in great shape, even this habitat is in decline, as Osvald pointed out, and this is data from Pronatura noroeste. So we've seen a decrease in percent cover of native tree species from 2002 to 2013, and following that comes a decline in avian diversity. So this is all to say that without intervention into the system at this point, things were looking somewhat grim for native riparian habitat. Which leads us to minute 319. I'm not going to get into detail on this because the three who spoke this morning in the plenary provided such a great background. But I will point out that one of the goals was to restore 2,300 acres of habitat. And of course, another goal is to renegotiate a longer term agreement to dedicate flows to the region. And I will point out, just because it's incredible, that Minute 319 is the first international agreement that dedicates water to the environment in a binational river. So that's really something to be proud of for our team. I'm going to get into our restoration efforts now. And, Pronatura noroeste and Sonoran Institute have been working in the Delta since, well, for a long time. Restoration in the riparian corridor kind of started around 2006. And we have other projects that are ongoing in the region, including the Hardy River, the Las Serranitas treatment wetland, and in the upper Gulf of California estuary. And those are still ongoing. And I guess the point of that is that by having those smaller scale restoration projects already in place, I think that built a lot of momentum for decision makers to say, okay, this is what we can do in the Delta. This is what restoration looks like. And let's make more of that happen to kind of push the Minute 319 forward. So Minute 319 goes from 2012 to 2017. It involves both active and passive restoration, and that's only targeting the Colorado River riparian corridor. So active restoration target areas are spread throughout the corridor, primarily focused in these areas where there is favorable depth of groundwater in reaches up 2 and part of 3, and then reach 4. The bulk is in reach 4, again, because of the favorable conditions. The total area for active restoration is 840 acres for Minute 319, and for passive restoration, it's 2,300 acres. And what exactly do I mean by passive and active restoration? These terms can get a little messy from time to time, so I'll just say what we mean when we're talking about the Minute 319. So passive restoration is really the goal of the pulse flow. You're putting a bunch of water in the river and hoping to create the conditions needed for native plant establishment. So what that typically means for riparian species is you have bare, moist soils with a slow rate of recession following inundation. So that's kind of the goal of the pulse flow. And then in anticipation of an upcoming movie that's being released, not that I know anything about it, 50 Shades of Active Restoration, or 50 Shades of Green maybe, is, there's a lot of variation going on with the type of active restoration we do. So this can mean basically what Matt was describing. We're removing non-native species and opening up river meanders, basically doing the things that a larger flood flow would do naturally. In the absence of a really large flood flow, we're doing these things for the system. So this shows, Okay. This shows us reconnecting one of the meanders with the river channel. This is a river channel back here. So opening up a historic meander to create some of those access for water to those backwater habitat areas, and then some of our salt cedar removal. And then with this sort of assisted passive, if you want to call it that, or active with natural establishment, we're still just promoting the establishment of native riparian tree species. We're not planting or seeding or anything. This is another type. It's a little more management intensive, where we're actively planting and seeding and then irrigating on top of that. So we remove non-native species. We'll either level the area and create furrows, and we'll plant with native species and irrigate or flood the area. So this is a photo of a new revegetation technique that we've been using in the past few years called hydroseeding. We basically have a big water tank and we collect native seed in the area, dry it, store it, and then put it in the tank and spray it on prepared land. And that's a really cool way to basically increase the genetic diversity in your restoration sites. And that technique has been in development with geosystems analysis. So looking at our active restoration achievements to date, and I was just talking with Osval at lunch, and he said that actually they're up to 40 acres now at Miguel Alemán. So I need to update my table. And these numbers include both Minute 319 and non-Minute 319 sites that were actively restored, no passive included here. So 40 acres at Miguel Alemán and 200 acres at Laguna Grande. These are images from Laguna Grande. So this is the bulk of where the active restoration has been done so far. And this is the whole restoration site area I've been talking about. So it includes 3 land concession polygons that were granted to Prinatura and Sonoran Institute by the Mexican government for the purpose of restoration. And we do have, a long-term vision in mind for the restoration of this area, and we're starting to work with a lot of different folks on, extending that long-term vision to the rest of the riparian corridor, to not just, focus on the Laguna Grande area. So looking at a smaller scale, this is one of the areas that we plan to restore in 2015 called the Herradura. It's the horseshoe in Spanish. So we're starting to get our plans lined up for 2015. Sonoran Institute aims to restore 150 acres of different habitat types, including willow swale, cottonwood willow, and mesquite bosque, marsh, open water, and then installing some public use facilities as well in the sites. And then special projects include planting and seeding diversification demonstration plots. So we basically identified a lot of different kinds of native plants in our sites already, and we're collecting seed and going to use those in our restoration in the future. So basically just diversifying the species. We've been pretty solid on the cottonwood willow habitat type restoration thus far, and we're going to look into some different species types as well. So we're also developing a coyote willow nursery and continuing with hydroseeding projects this year. And I will say that most of these projects are also in collaboration with geosystems analysis. And so not only is this habitat that we're creating important for wildlife in the region, particularly birds, but we've also been using our restoration sites as a tool for community engagement. So we have, a lot of community groups that come out to our sites, help with restoration activities. We give environmental education workshops. Our Adopt the River group is a program it's an outreach program. We work with government agencies and community groups to basically get them involved in our restoration efforts. Alas del Delta is a local birdwatching guide group. So if you ever want to come down to the Delta and see birds, they're your people right there. Spanish and English tours. We have university groups come down, we lead tours, and then we also have a lot of local community members who are actually our staff. I think we have, depending on the season, 20 to 30 folks who live just right on the river who are helping with our restoration efforts as our staff people. So it's pretty cool. Okay, switching gears now to talk about monitoring. So what are we doing when we're releasing these pulse flows? What are we doing when we're doing active restoration in these sites? And the goal of our active site monitoring, so this is at Laguna Grande only, we're basically assessing what type of habitat we're creating and seeing how that habitat changes over time to adapt our methods and change restoration methods if we need to. So and then in collaboration with Pronatura, who collects data on birds, we can correlate different habitat types and habitat structures with bird use as well. And we're hoping to this year also get a more site-specific program developed for bird monitoring, groundwater and soil monitoring as well in Laguna Grande. I should just mention that. So our active site vegetation monitoring, we established randomly distributed plots within the active restoration sites. We used a 15 by 5 nested plot design with a density of 1 plot per 5 acres. And we're looking at the following parameters. I'm not going to read all those. If you want to, you can write them down. And then I will mention too that we did a pilot effort in 2014, basically to determine the plot density that was needed to meet our habitat characterization and change detection goals. So the density of our plots might change a little bit in the future as we analyze that data. So that's the active monitoring in Laguna Grande. I'll get into now the monitoring efforts that are part of Minute 319. So I'm talking about river-wide assessment of the vegetation response to the pulse flow. So we had 22 transects set up along the Riparian corridor from reach 1 to the top of reach 5 here. And those were co-located with piezometers to basically be able to correlate the vegetation response with groundwater. And we looked at timing and abundance of seed dispersal, vegetation before and after, seedling locations and densities, and then topography before and after, soil texture and salinity before and after. And I will say the topography was both topographic surveys on the ground, and we had LiDAR before and after as well. So that's pretty exciting data. I'm not going to talk too much about methods, but the important thing to note here is that our vegetation surveys were conducted in March, May, and October of 2014. So that's before and immediately after, and then October is after a summer of survival. So the October surveys will be important to tell us, how did the seedlings fare over that dry summer? And we used a line intercept belt method along the transect to estimate plant cover by species. Unfortunately, we don't have our October results quite ready. We're still looking at those, but I do have the May survey results. So this is basically telling you germination immediately after the pulse flow. These top 4 rows here are target restoration species. They're native, and we can see these are patches where seedlings were detected along the belt transect. So we can see that they primarily establish in reaches 1 and 4, a little bit in reach 2. And again, that's pretty much what we would expect given groundwater conditions and the existing vegetation that's there already in those areas. In the dry reach, not a whole lot going on because whatever becomes established probably quickly dried out due to the quick recession rate and the very deep groundwater tables. So also, I'd like to point out that tamarisk established quite heartily in almost all reaches except for reach 5, and I'm sure it established there too. Our transect just didn't catch it. So not surprising. And then Oswald touched on this. This is our remote sensing analysis of the vegetation change. This study was led by Pam Nagler and Ed Glenn. They looked at NDVI and EVI from Landsat and MODIS data and combined the data sets to look at changes from 2002 to the present. And Oswald kind of already mentioned this, but I want to point out one thing is that, even though substantial amount of the surface flow from the pulse flow didn't make it very far down the channel. It infiltrated into the ground. Vegetation did become greener downstream, and so this suggests that perhaps the groundwater did travel to those lower reaches and is supporting existing vegetation. Another thing that the greenness response suggests is that, with this pulse flow, not only is it important to try and establish new cohorts of trees, but it's also really important to support existing trees. So in those initial slides where I showed, the decline of native habitat, and Oswell has showed that, that decline has stopped. That's a really important point of the pulse flow. These are just some before, during, and after photos of the pulse flow to give you a sense of what it looked like and what happened afterwards in some different areas along the river. So this is in Reach 2, I believe, dry channel, during, and after. So, not much changed. The Tamarisk looks heavier and larger, and Eloise did change her clothes, which is good. This is in the Laguna Grande site where we've excavated some of the meanders, and we've created these slopes along the banks to be able to have a slower rate of recession of the pulse flow during and after. So you can see a pretty narrow ribbon of establishment here of both native and non-native species. This is another site similar during and after. So some cottonwood, willow, tamarisk, a whole mix of stuff going on. Next steps include, for the minute 19 analysis, we will be looking at our survey data from October 2014. This will be a big next step, is to integrate all of our data sets. So combining the veg data with the hydrologic, geomorphologic, soil salinity, seed dispersal, and the remote sensing data, so we can really kind of piece out what vegetation establishment is looking like and some of the factors that led to establishment in some places and not in other places. And then at the Laguna Grande site, we'll be analyzing the 2014 active monitoring plot data. We haven't gotten to that yet. And we'll be implementing the 2015 restoration plans. So with that, thank you very much. I hope I have time for questions. One question. Great.